Looking at the second reading from Kant's Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, the first idea that he presents is the idea of a goodwill. That a goodwill is unconditionally good, and we've gone over what I think he means by that. But we can ask, what is it that distinguishes a goodwill from a bad one, or what is it that, what is a goodwill? And we find at the end of the first reading and then into the second reading that a goodwill is one that is prompted by recognition of duty. And that becomes the second step. I mean, it is absolute fair and natural question once he says, well, the only thing that's good intrinsically, unexceptionally, unconditionally is goodwill. Well, what is a goodwill? Well, goodwill is one that is motivated by a recognition of duty, and that duty is the ground of goodwill. So, as Kant in this reading lays out, if, whether an action has moral worth, we'll use that expression. Moral worth. What does that mean? Well, what he really means is moral worth is I think that's what he means. We can work on the example or intuitive level. If you get up and make yourself a bowl of cereal because you're hungry, that action is neither good nor bad. It's just an action. It has no moral worth. It's not bad, but it has no moral worth. If you get up in the morning and you write a check for a charity that feeds hungry children, that action has moral worth. If you walk outside and get into your car and take a drive out to the park and look at the trees, that's fine, but the action has no moral worth. If you walk outside and you get into the car and you drive to the soup kitchen to volunteer to help feed hungry people, that action has moral worth. That's sort of, I think, what he's talking about here. To say that an action doesn't have moral worth is not necessarily to say that it's bad. It's just to say that it's not an action that can be said to be morally good. It's morally allowable. It's morally permissible, but it's not morally praiseworthy, you might say. So why is this important? Well, because only an action for Kant, only an action done out of duty has moral worth. What are the other things that we do, actions are done out of? Well, the big one he mentions is inclination. Inclination is just desire. I have an inclination, he says, to preserve my own happiness. Something done out of feeling or impulse. I have an inclination to eat if I'm hungry, and I have an inclination to drink if I'm thirsty. And I may have an inclination to be good to others. Right? He says sympathy, love is an inclination. Right? And the big idea is that if your reason for doing something, or if the motivation for doing something is inclination, then because it's not duty, it has no moral worth. That does not mean it's bad. It does not mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that you don't get any moral credit for doing it. The only time you get moral credit for doing something, that is, when we can say the action has moral worth, when it's prompted by duty. I think that by the end of this, we do get a notion of, like what the next question. I'm sorry. No, I know the next. What is the next question? Well, if we follow out the questions here, you know, he says, the only thing that is morally good, really good, except in an exceptionless way, is a goodwill. What is a goodwill? Well, goodwill is one that's prompted by recognition of duty. So the only time that an action can be said to be morally good is when it's prompted by duty rather than inclination. But the next question really is, and this is crucial. See in class, duty to what? That is, duty always has to be to something. Just think about the word duty. It has to be duty to something. There's no such thing as a free floating duty. If somebody said, "Well, why did you do that?" Well, and you say, "Well, I had a duty to do that." Well, why? What did you have a duty to? There's no such thing as just a general having a duty. It has to be a duty to something. And this is absolutely crucial. What Kant thinks we have a duty to, duty towards, because that's whatever that thing is, it has the authority to lay upon us a duty, which is, what is a duty? A duty is an obligation. You can't be said to have a duty to something unless you're obliged to it. So to have a duty to do something is to be obliged to do something. What is it that can have the authority, or that does have the authority, that can truly lay upon us an obligation, which is a heavy thing, right? Well, for Kant, that duty is always to the law. In this case, to be a little more explicit, the moral law. So we only have a duty when there is something that has the authority to lay upon us a duty or obligation. In Kant's mind, what does have that status, that authority over us, is the law. So at the end of this, we come out with a goodwill is a recognition of our duty to the moral law.